Myron Cohen on the current update on HPTN 052.
Thanks, Paul. Well, thanks to Julio for inviting me personally and letting so many of the HPTN studies be presented. And Julio and I have had disagreements, as some of you know. This is my first time in Vancouver without a visa, so so I really appreciate your inviting me. Having said that, we're going to talk about 052, and I'm going to show slides. So 052 started out, it's a treatment as prevention study, and there were 4 questions. Can ART prevent HIV transmission? But that was never really a very popular question, because people said, of course ART will stop transmission. The real question we were trying to address was, what's the magnitude of prevention? By how much could we see prevention? And what's the durability? Is this going to be sustained over some period of time? We were always concerned about what do we tell infected people, and that remains, I think today, perhaps one of the most important questions of this meeting, is exactly what message do we tell infected people? We've said that over and over again. Then, another theme at this meeting is, can we reduce HIV incidence with antiretroviral therapy, and what are the barriers to treatment as prevention? So these are the original questions. The way we decided to approach this, we were never about a gigantic implementation study. It was really focusing on the first question, magnitude and durability, and we then developed a randomized controlled trial, HPTN 052, where we would randomize one group to an immediate arm, at that time 350 to 550. I think the word immediate today would mean something totally different. And the other arm would be delayed, offered therapy before 200, but below 250. The actual median starting of the entire study was 446, and the actual median treatment of the delayed arm was 226. There were 2 co-primary endpoints that were considered concomitantly. Linked transmission events, were they prevented using viral phylogeny, as Carl Diefenbach mentioned this morning, and then clinical benefit, WHO stage 4 clinical events, severe bacterial infection, pulmonary tuberculosis, and extrapulmonary tuberculosis, or death. Now this was not, ironically, all these years later, this turns out to be a fairly popular study. I can promise you this was not so popular. It's like being in high school. Okay, this was not so popular when it started and as it moved forward. And during the 10 years that preceded the study, we had to try and figure out which drugs were appropriate, because it seemed to us unlikely that every drug would be an appropriate drug for prevention. There might be drugs that would be very good for health, but wouldn't concentrate in the genital tract sufficiently. 6 U.S. drug companies had to be convinced to give ART for 2,000 people for 5 years for free. That is a lot of free drug, and at one point we had 80% of all of Glaxo's generosity supply, that's not the right word, all of Glaxo's compassionate supply, thank you. We had to convince NIH to go forward. That was not that easy, to be perfectly honest, but they did eventually. And then this study took almost 10 years, and the investigators were blinded during the entire study. That isn't much fun for them to have no idea what's happening to the subjects that they're managing. And then throughout the study, and I think this is important to this meeting, we faced an unbelievable number of ethical challenges and equipoise challenges. And not to be too narcissistic, which I don't mind being, I would highly recommend this article in Clinical Trials about all the ethical challenge that this study faced with Jeremy Sugarman, the ethicist from Hopkins. So ultimately we enrolled about 1,763 couples, 278 in the Americas, only 2 lonely couples in North America. All the others are in Brazil and elsewhere. And 954 in Africa. Malawi got a lot of attention yesterday. 500 of these couples were enrolled in Malawi, and 531 couples in Asia. One thing that hasn't come up at this meeting is about research and study subjects. The study subjects donated an incredible amount of time to the study, because they and their partners had to come every month for visits and have viral suppression measured, because we had an iron grip on viral suppression. I learned only recently, and this was quite moving to me, I learned only a few months ago, I guess this year, that as we learned the results of this study, and then we told the study subjects before the results were made public, each of the sites had a party and cakes, and the study subjects had dancing and music, because they were so excited to contribute to this information. So I think we should not take for granted the contribution of the people who volunteer their time in this kind of work. So ultimately, this proved to be 96% effective over 2.1 years. Michelle Sidibe said this was an important finding. And that's like, okay, so that's all part A. Okay, so everybody who follows this field probably knew all that. So what can I say that's new? I'm going to now go into kind of unpublished data. Is this understandable at this rate of speed? I talk very fast, and I can talk faster than known. Now, this slide is if you're trying to understand this slide, no human can understand this slide. But it's cut. It doesn't matter that it's cut off. It's good that it's cut off, because if you tried to understand it, you couldn't understand it. The only point about this slide is it's published, and so why am I showing you this slide? Don't look at the slide under any circumstance. It would be like death. This is published in PLOS One this year, and what it's showing is the power that we have to interpret a result. So there was one transmission event in the immediate arm, and subsequently somebody on therapy in the delayed arm had a transmission event. But using the tools of molecular virology, which is shown on that slide, we can know everything about the viral transmission event. And we were able to understand that the viral transmissions in these two cases almost certainly occurred right around the time the study subjects started on their antiviral therapy. So given that, if you just look at the lower line where it says 87,000 copies, that's the copy number the person had in their blood, and their partner was negative by a 1-copy assay. Their partner was negative. 85 days later, their partner was positive, and the tools of molecular virology suggest that the transmission event occurred very close to the day we started therapy. What's the point? If you're going to use treatment as prevention, you don't use it the same day. It takes time to lower the viral load, concentrate the drugs in the genital tract, and so on. So now, in the first paper we published, we had only the primary endpoints. Working with the ACTG and a lot of other investigators, we've now summarized all the toxicities and all the possible endpoints, and I'll just make a couple of points in the slide. There is a clinical benefit. So if you look at 446, which was the median in the immediate arm, versus 226, the delayed arm, there's a clinical benefit, and that's shown in the 2 lines separating on the left of the slide. The benefit in the paper, in the current manuscript that will be published by Beatrice Grinstein from Brazil, demonstrates a big difference in tuberculosis events, which I'll say a word more about in a second, a big difference in stage 4 events, and no significant difference in bacterial pneumonia, but actually bacterial pneumonia was more common in the immediate arm for reasons we don't understand. So I won't even try and interpret that. Now, the tuberculosis issue is important because we tried to get the study subjects to take INH as a prophylaxis, but the investigators nor the subjects were interested in this. So starting earlier really prevents lots of cases of pulmonary and extrapulmonary tuberculosis. And Van Havler is here, who's a great expert in this, and I think that's not a small thing. Second, when you look at secondary events, which haven't been reported, there's a very significant difference in herpes zoster, oral candidiasis, and skin conditions and dermatitis. Now, those are not going to be life-threatening, but they're uncomfortable. So when you start at higher CD4 counts, there's a substantial visible benefit. But let's flip that around. The substantial benefit is, I would argue, a little bit subtle. And so if in this very carefully controlled study at 250 to 446, or 226 to 446, we have trouble seeing a difference, imagine how difficult it would be to see a difference at much higher CD4 counts without doing a Framingham study, without following people for 20 or 30 years. Now, what would you be looking for over 20 or 30 years? Cancer, stroke, heart disease. That might be important, but I think that we should understand the limits of 052, because it's telling us how difficult it is to see a difference even at 226 versus 446. Now, Rochelle Walensky and her colleagues have submitted a paper that I think will be accepted soon, presented at IAS, that looks at the cost-benefit ratios in the CPAC model. And their argument is that in South Africa, over the time frame of the study, that the intervention was very cost-effective. They're looking both at transmission and clinical benefit. Whereas in India, it's very cost-effective. In South Africa, it's actually cost savings. Now, this is really important because the economics people never report anything to be cost savings. In fact, in the Harvard group, this is the first time they've reported anything to be cost savings. So we anticipate that this paper will help push policymakers in the direction that I think most people in this room want to go. One thing that's not been mentioned at this meeting, shockingly, is the macroeconomic benefits of earlier treatment. The journal Health Affairs had a whole issue devoted to treatment as prevention, essentially, or earlier treatment, and PEPFAR and some other things. Harsha Thurmanathy, my colleague, he and 2 other groups all looked at GDP as a function of starting ART earlier. And in each of these papers, they showed a benefit to the economy of the countries where therapy was made available. So I think the macroeconomic benefit of treating people earlier is worth advocating. So where are we now? What happened next? This study is still going on, and it's controlled by a data safety monitoring board, although they tried to throw us out. We refused to believe our data safety monitoring board. And 96% of the people remain in the study, 85% have the same sexual partner, and all but about 52, I think, are now on ART. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Why is this study going on? Because every transmission event we need to know about, because we need to understand the durability of prevention. Now that we don't have an iron grip on suppression, because we've released our iron grip, we need to see, are people still taking their pills volitionally? Second, are there adverse events in the earlier group? And third and most important, in the group that was in the delayed arm, did we do them harm? In order to know that, we're going to have to follow them for a very long period of time. Is it worth following that delay? This is the only cohort we're aware of where it's randomized and you have a delayed arm for 2 years delayed. Should we follow them for 5 or 10 years? Pedro says yes. So anybody from the NIH, he's shaking his head yes, and Julio, so I'll consider that like funding. I'm going to be in a nursing home when this study is over. I will for sure be, and Julio is willing to pay for this out of the Vancouver budget. Now, a big issue is, and this came up a lot of times, what about people who are not taking treatment and you suggest they take treatment? The reluctance, the provider's reluctance, the patient's reluctance. So we looked at and are publishing a paper about people who accepted therapy in the delayed arm and why they might have declined therapy. So this is what it looks like. I'll slow down on this slide. We said on the day we learned the results, we're going to treat everybody. And the NIH was unequivocal about this. Now remember, when we decided to treat everybody, we're violating every country's guidelines. So we're never in the right ethical place. Now we're treating people whatever their CD4 count is. Most people accepted therapy right away, but some people declined therapy. And this is a table of the people who declined therapy. And you'll see it was originally 102 people that declined therapy and 73 subsequently have declined therapy as of about 6 months ago. But every visit they were offered therapy and suggested that therapy was appropriate. Why are they not starting therapy? Because they believe their CD4 count is too high. This is a problem. We've created a whole generation of clients and physicians who are married to a number that most of us no longer believe in. So if we think we're going to change this overnight, I see that as a big problem. These are people who volunteered to be in a study. They anticipated getting treatment. And when we offered them the treatment they were anticipating, they're now refusing the treatment because of this kind of confusion about when you should start treatment. So why should you start therapy now? What do we tell the people? We say, you have HIV replicating in your blood. This can't be good. There's no way you would ask to have HIV replicating in your blood. We think there is reduced long-term survival. Now, this is a hard thing to tell somebody 25 years old, that people in England say you live a normal lifespan if you start therapy today, but you lose 4 or 5 years if you wait 4 or 5 years. That's a very hard concept when you're 25 years old, but it's a concept that I think the British investigators are going to push, and I think they're right. There's the ongoing transmission risk, which I think we've all agreed can be avoided through treatment. There's the cost-benefit ratio, both at the micro and macroeconomic level. So how would you justify not starting treatment immediately? Well, maybe there's anticipated detection of novel harm. We've had these drugs a long time. It's possible that there's harm we don't see. There's an ongoing search for benefit, but I've told you from my point of view, seeing benefit will be very difficult at high CD4 counts, and if you're going to try and do it over 5 years, because I think it'll be very subtle. There's the patient reluctance. Is the patient ready to start? But built into that is the confusion that we've caused with 20 years of moving the CD4 count around. We've caused confusion in the patients and confusion in the caregivers. So if we can't get a uniform message, which is very difficult, by the way, that confusion is not going to go away overnight. And then, in my mind, the worst thing is confusing logistical challenges and money with the best medical advice. I think that's really important for us to separate. What is the best, and Pedro and I have been at many meetings where we've talked about this, what's the best medical advice? We know there's logistical challenges, we know there's a monetary problem, but that's different than the best medical advice or best public health advice. So to end my little comments, I'll give my own opinion. I see us in this bridging place right now, and I worry about this meeting for a different reason. You worried about this meeting for some reasons, I'm worried for a different reason. I'm worried because it's too siloed. What I mean by siloed is it doesn't embrace all the things going on in HIV, all the things going on in the vaccine field, and all the things going on in the cure AIDS field. In 1985, HIV was uniformly fatal. In 1995, one life-saving drug changed everything for most of us. In 2005, one pill a day is sufficient to keep people alive for a normal lifespan. This disease cannot look the same 10 years from now. Its management will not be the same. So in my mind, it's like what people, and somebody showed a slide this morning, I'll just embrace it. In my mind, there are 34 million people who need treatment. They need it for their own health, and they need it for transmission prevention. This, to me, is an acceptable end of the story. And I'm not saying this will make the epidemic go away. I'm saying that that's the right public health and medical thing to do. But this mass treatment is not forever. This is a bridge, which is why I showed that beautiful bridge. This is a bridge to simpler therapy, which I'm sure is going to be modified to much less frequent therapy. Once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year shots, patches, who knows what we're going to have 10 years from now. And secondly, the cure AIDS field has hundreds of people working on this. To ignore that field is to kind of take away the hope and aspiration that I think is totally appropriate to the goals of this meeting. So in summary, HPTN 052 will probably go on forever and ever and ever. I hope that I can visit you on Skype from my nursing home. And thank you for listening. Thank you.